Hi, I'm Virginia and I've been a medical writer and content creator since 2020 and a registered UK pharmacist since 2014. So in this video, I want to answer this question, which is what exactly is freelance medical writing? And this is a question that somebody commented on a previous video where somebody was asking about moving from working in an agency as a full-time medical writer, as an employee, to going into freelance medical writing. I'll link that video down below if you want to have a watch and see the context. And so in this video, I want to give a balanced overview of what being a freelance medical writer is like, because I have been an employee at an agency, at a medical communications agency for a year, and then I was made redundant. And then I was also working as an employee as an in-house medical copywriter for a year as well at a health tech company, and I was unfortunately made redundant from that as well. And in between all of this time, during the past 5 years, I've been a freelance medical writer. So I've got a bit more perspective and I want to share my thoughts on what I feel the differences are between being a freelance medical writer and being an employee medical writer. So I think the next question that people probably have is, what is a freelance medical writer exactly? And so this is when you set your own rate for your work. So maybe you decide to charge a certain amount of money per hour. For example, I used to charge £25 per hour. Now I charge £75 plus per hour. And you're also responsible for how much work you do. So as a freelancer, you do not get given work. You have to go and find it. And then you decide if you want to do that work. So you want to take on that project from a client. And your client could be either a pharmaceutical company, or it could be an agency, or it could be a individual. And you could also work for like a startup, maybe an individual company, or maybe a fellow medical writer who needs help with their work. And you can work with multiple people or companies. Now, when you work in a pharmaceutical company, you're normally just working for that company. Or, for example, when I worked for the health tech company, I only worked for that company. And that's what they call in-house. And that's when you are only working for one place, one client. And when you work for an agency, you only work for the agency, but the agency might have multiple clients. So you might be on multiple projects that have different briefs and different styles of writing and different what we call deliverables. So these are the documents that you ultimately have to produce as a medical writer. Now that could be a slide deck, or it could be a poster, or it could be a blog article or a collection of social media posts, etc. And so you can create your own business as a freelance medical writer as well. So if you want to operate as an agency, that means that you will go and find work, and then you will do some of the work, maybe yourself, and then you'll also find a medical writer that can help you with that work, or maybe you'll find a designer that can help you with that work, or maybe even a videographer. Maybe you want to make some videos. So there are lots of options that you can go into as a freelance medical writer, but it does mean that you are responsible for everything and you do not have a contract like you would as an employee, with maybe working for an agency or working for a pharmaceutical company or working in-house at like a health tech company or startup or somewhere else. So the next question is, can you actually freelance? So this is one of two slides with the different types of medical writing on them. So if you are an academic writer and you work on journals, publications, or you do research, then usually your kind of options for freelancing could be limited. Now, this is just my opinion because I haven't done academic writing beyond my thesis in my master's degree as a pharmacist. So I would say that if you are into academic writing, then you are probably going to be doing things like applying for grants, which is when you get money to actually do your research. And this means you'll be writing a proposal as to why your research is important, why you need a certain amount of money, so how much you're actually looking for. And then also you have to kind of explain what you're going to spend that money on and why you're asking it from that particular place. So, for example, if you are asking for money from a charity that supports research in the heart and cardiovascular disease, for example, then you need to say, well, my research is going to support what the charity is researching anyway. So if I apply for a grant, then the charity can make use of my insights and things like that. So needs to be relevant. So some people who do academic writing, they are doing their own kind of independent research. So they are self-funding and they are trying to find things out because that's what interests them. Or maybe they have a personal kind of journey that they're going on. So sometimes there's like a family member that maybe has been diagnosed with a specific disease and they want to go and research maybe a potential treatment. And so academic writing could be done freelance, but it's probably not going to pay that much. It does depend on how successful you are with getting grants and things like that. And also it might depend on the funding of the place that you are carrying out the research. So if you're doing it in a university or if you're doing it in a charity and that kind of thing. So you can actually apply to certain charities if you want to help them do research as well. And usually the difficult thing with academic writing is that you want to make sure that your writing gets published. And usually when your writing gets published, it means that the publisher now owns your work, which I don't like. And then they might put your work behind a paywall so other people have to pay to access it. And then, you've done the research, you get the credit for that publication, but there's a limit to access. So freelancing as an academic could be an option, but the pay might not be amazing depending on who you are working under or with. So when it comes to journalism, so medical journalism, this is when you're going to be reporting on news. So maybe there was a new research paper that came out that discovered something amazing, or maybe you're going to be attending an event or maybe a conference or a congress. And these are all places where you can definitely freelance because they usually just need someone who is either in the local area or willing to travel and has done it before, ideally. And I have known medical writers who do this, and usually there's a quick turnaround time. So conferences and events are very kind of seasonal. So you might not be able to freelance for the full year, but there tend to be events during certain times, usually in like autumn or spring, but not usually in summer because a lot of people go on holiday, they all have families, etc. And also it's nice weather. So, so I would also say that news can be year round though. So it depends on what comes out in terms of like research publications and discoveries and things like that, or maybe updates to guidelines. So that's probably more sustainable if you want to be a freelancer. And maybe you could do a mixture of both. So maybe if you like to travel to do summaries of like in-person lectures that you attend, there are also virtual conferences as well that could be online, so you can attend and then you can write a summary of the lecture that you attended, because usually it's very specific information that's being shared and it's at the height of research as well. So it's very new and probably a lot of investment has gone into actually researching those things. So yes, you can do medical journalism as a freelance option, and whether you're reporting on news or you are attending these seasonal conferences. So the next thing is educational textbooks. So you could be writing them, reviewing them, fact-checking them, or checking references and things like that. And I would say that you can definitely do this freelance. It's actually something that my partner does. And usually you can either do textbooks or courses or leaflets or maybe easy read guides. And I've written some easy read guides and leaflets and created lots of courses as well. So I would say that this is very flexible. You can definitely freelance if you want to do kind of medical education writing. And some people do create learning materials for healthcare professionals as well. So maybe you'll be creating a kind of medical development or continuing development course for doctors or nurses or pharmacists or physiotherapists and so on. And sometimes you might want to create some things for students. Maybe they are in school, so they haven't graduated, maybe they're like under 18, or maybe for undergraduates who are in university and they're learning things for the first time. So there are lots of options in this type of medical writing. So the next type of medical writing is regulatory medical writing. This is different to regulatory affairs, which is all about the kind of technical side of things. When you do regulatory medical writing, you're normally writing up clinical trials, and you're also trying to do the approvals documents for drugs or medical devices, or even software, which can be medical devices as well. And this is something that is quite difficult to do if you're a freelancer, because there's a lot of confidential agreements that you might need to sign. And sometimes you'll get a dedicated laptop from the company and they'll say, okay, we want you on a 2-year contract. And so you're only going to be working for that company. You might sign a non-compete. Maybe you cannot work for a similar company or on a similar topic. So maybe oncology for a number of years after you complete that project. So really read your contract carefully. And so it's difficult to freelance if you want to do regulatory medical writing because of those restrictions and confidentiality. It is possible, so maybe you could get some documents where they want you to review the information, or maybe they want you to break down the information into something that's a bit more digestible. So I did a podcast with Elena, and she gets information and then she has to design it. And usually that's a way that sometimes pharma companies will allow you to work with them. And so they'll probably not include you in the kind of research and discovery process. They'll probably include you in the kind of medcoms kind of situation afterwards. And so that's the next one I want to go into, which is medical communications, also known as medcoms. And this is when you are going to be taking that kind of the results from clinical trials, maybe after the approval has gone through, and you need to start creating educational materials to actually teach people about this thing that has been approved, whether that's a drug, device, or piece of software. And you might be creating something for doctors or for patients, and you might also be creating things for conferences and congresses. So you might be the person who's creating the slide deck, and you might also be creating things for the sales team and maybe something like a detail aid as well. And so that's when you have everything there is to know about the product that you need to promote or teach people about. And this is something that is usually done traditionally by an agency. So there'll be agencies that specialize in promoting certain things. So maybe there'll be an agency that deals with rare diseases, and maybe an agency that deals with maybe oncology or cancer treatments or diagnosis. And so you can do medcoms freelance for sure, because there are lots of agencies, they usually need help. And I would say that sometimes a little bit of creativity is involved as well. And you need to be really good at taking information, digesting it, and putting it clearly in a clear structure on a document in lots of different formats, as I have mentioned. So the next kind of medical writing that you could definitely do, probably the easiest to do apart from the educational writing and journalism where you're reporting on news, is any kind of marketing or adverts or copywriting or social media, or writing scripts for maybe videos that are going to be posted on social media, or maybe for a podcast, or maybe for a show. And so this is the type of medical writing that I mainly do. I have done some medical journalism, and I do lots of educational things as well. And I mostly do copywriting, and it's usually in the educational space. So I'm trying to persuade people to change their behavior or learn something new about their medicine, or maybe a health condition or a disease, to kind of change their mind about it and help them to make informed decisions about their health. So mainly for patients and the public. And I would say that if you enjoy being creative, if you enjoy learning how to write in a persuasive way, or maybe you're trying to change people's behaviors as well, then this is a really great kind of step into medical writing. And I've been loving it, and I've been able to freelance for a long time doing it. And of course, the limitations of freelancing is always finding the right client at the right time, and that they actually need you in that moment to do that work. So building your relationships as a freelancer is the most important thing, as well as producing really good work so that you can keep your client for as long as possible, or even if you complete a project with them, then they can come back to you in future and say, hey, we really liked working with you, really thought your work was amazing. Can you now work on this with us? So that could be sometime in the future. So I've had clients who I'll work with them one Christmas, and then they come with me they come to approach me with another piece of work, maybe a whole year later. So don't think that you did a bad job, and try to ignore any kind of feelings of imposter syndrome. And yeah, they will likely come back to you if you did a good job. So now I want to talk about the direct differences between being a freelancer and an employee. Now, I'm not saying that I know everything, but I'm going to talk about my experience, and hopefully you'll find that helpful. So, being a freelancer medical writer versus being an employee medical writer, the first thing I have to talk about is your work hours. So, when I was working as a freelance medical writer, and I still work as a freelance medical writer, I can work whenever I want, as much as I want, and I can also take a break whenever I want as well. And no one is really chasing me to do the work. I do have deadlines, but it means that I can meet that deadline quickly because I've got lots of capacity or lots of time to actually complete that project. And then I'll also be quite selective with the work that I take on as well. So I try to avoid taking on too much work so I don't have the time to do good work, good quality work. But as an employee, you will work from 9 until 6, probably Monday to Friday. And I have been in a situation as an employee where I've done a little bit of extra work at the weekend, or I've had to do a little bit of overtime, which was unpaid. And sometimes I would get my overtime given back to me as holiday, which was really nice. So it's good to be acknowledged for work that you've done outside of your contracted work hours. So this means on your contract, the document that you sign when you agree to do the work is going to say you must be at work between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, unless you are, you've been signed off for holiday or you're sick or something like that. So there can be restrictions on your time as an employee. And I did find that was the thing that pushed me more and more to become a freelancer, because I do not really like to work for more than a 3-hour block. And so working from 9 to 6, I'd have to work at least 2 4-hour blocks, I think. So that was not my favorite thing. And I tend to work best in 1 or 2 hour chunks. And then I'll have like a 15-minute, 20-minute break, or maybe I'll go for a walk, or I'll be at the gym for an hour or two. And so I like to have a bit more flexibility with my time. And also the work location. So when you're an employee, you're more likely to be asked to be in a specific country. However, I have been an employee in Germany and working for a UK company, and that was through Bamboo HR. And so they're a company where they create the contract for employees in different countries so that they can work with other companies in other countries. So I had a German contract as an employee, but I was working for a UK company, and that contract costs the company, I think, about £10,000 per year. So it's a really big expense for the company to actually employ you if you are living abroad. And so that's why freelancing can be more of an affordable option for agencies or companies who want to work with a medical writer abroad. And so I've had that situation as well, where I was working part-time for about 1.5 years with a company, and they decided, I could choose if I wanted an employee contract or a freelancer contract. And I said a freelancer contract is probably going to be better for both of us, and I'll just keep track of my hours and bill you the hours. And so that's what I did. And so sometimes as an employee, you will have to travel to places. So even though I was an employee in Germany, I still had to fly to the UK. Sometimes I'd go to Manchester or London or Brighton or Leeds, and I would have to just allocate that time as part of my contracted work hours. So if I spent, time in the airport, then that would be part of my contracted hours, and I'd make sure that I'm reimbursed that time either in money or in maybe holiday. So I would say as a freelancer, I travel a lot less. So travel is one of my least favorite things to do. And last year I traveled, I took flights 11 times. So 3 of those flights were personal. And so if I'm doing the majority of my travel being flights as part of work, that's not very enjoyable for me. So I tend to think of flights as going on holiday and enjoying myself, or I'm attending an event or a party or something like that. And so last year, my sister graduated from dental school and my other sister got her A-level results. So those were like two really big events that I didn't want to miss. And so that meant I had to do extra travel. And travel can be tiring. So if you're having to commute as an employee every day, so sometimes there is a situation called hybrid working where you have to be in the office maybe 2 or 3 days per week, and then the other days per week you're going to be working from home. And so that's something that I wouldn't mind doing if I was in the UK, for example, and working for a medical communications agency. I wouldn't mind going into work 2 or 3 days per week. And I think it's good to have people around you as well, but we'll come to that point a bit later. So as a freelancer, you definitely travel or commute less. You don't have like a daily routine to get to work. So time flexibility as a freelancer is much, much better compared to being an employee. So as an employee, you usually need to ask for permission, but that doesn't mean as a freelancer that you don't ask for permission. You definitely need to ask for permission if you're a freelancer because you're going to be working with multiple clients. So you need to let all of them know if you need to take time off. And the amount of money that you earn as a freelancer compared to being an employee can vary. It depends how much you want to work. So as a freelancer, sometimes I did earn more as an employee, but you can go through what they call a feast or famine cycle. So as a freelancer, there'll be seasons of work. So that means you will probably do a lot more work in autumn or spring or winter compared to summer. And I've definitely experienced that where some months I've got lots of money coming in and some months I've got hardly anything, and then you begin to panic. But this is something you can avoid by having regular clients and making sure that you are constantly looking for work. And when I say constantly, I don't mean like every single day you need to be sending out a pitch or you need to be trying to connect with someone or booking a call. I would say at least once a week, try and meet someone new and put your name out there. And at least once a week, try and post on social media, usually on LinkedIn, just so that people are aware of you. And the more they see your name pop up, the more kind of they'll feel familiar, and they'll also feel like they can reach out to you because they know that you are active and you're probably likely to answer your messages. So as an employee, you have got that kind of assurance, if you like, that you're going to get a regular income every month. And no matter how much work you do, you should earn essentially the same amount. And I really liked that as an employee because it meant that, even if there was a bank holiday, I was being paid for that day. If I ever took holiday off as part of my employment, I knew that I would get paid for that time as well. And so as a freelancer, you might need to work more or less to make up for any time that you want to take off. But we'll talk about holidays in a moment. So as a freelancer, you do need to do your own taxes, whereas as an employee, your taxes are normally taken out of your salary before you receive your salary. So you'll probably get your pay slip and it will say, however much was deducted as part of tax. Whereas as a freelancer, you will get all of your money, gross income, and then you'll need to minus or take away all of the expenses that you have had as a freelancer. And this can include things like if you bought a new work laptop or any software subscriptions, or maybe you bought a phone which you use only for business and that kind of thing. And so as a freelancer, you can, depending on the country that you're working in, you can claim things like, using part of your home as an office and things like that. And so all of these deductibles can reduce your tax payments, but it depends on how much you earn. Whereas as an employee, you don't really have that choice. So you can't claim expenses unless you are doing extra work on the side as an employee. So some people want to do a mixture of being an employee and being a freelancer. Now, that is possible. And I would say that you need to check your contract as an employee before you do any freelance work, because you don't want to earn any money outside of your employment contract. And then your employer says, well, you did that work during your contracted hours and we're going to take that money. So worst case scenario. But I would say that as an employee, maybe if you're a part-time employee, then maybe you could part-time freelance. It depends what kind of lifestyle you want to have. But if you do part-time freelance as an employee, you will need to file your own taxes. So you'll get taxes which are deducted from your payslip as usual, from your employment contract, and then as a freelancer, portion of your income, you'll need to enter that all manually and calculate that, or you can hire an accountant. So if you are a full-time freelancer, then you should ideally have an accountant. If you're an employee and part-time freelancing, then you should definitely have an accountant as well, because that will just make your life a lot easier. And so there isn't really a winner in the taxes situation because it depends on how much you earn and how much you spend on your business. But as a freelancer, you're probably not going to spend that much to run your business. As an employee, you're probably going to get access to a lot of stuff that is very expensive, or subscription services that your employer pays for, which would be very expensive for you to use if you're a freelancer. But if you freelance, sometimes your client will give you access to these pieces of software as well. So things like Viva. And so as a freelancer versus an employee, I want to talk about physical and mental well-being. So I have to say that as an employee, I found it much more difficult physically and mentally. As a freelancer, I would say it's probably much more difficult mentally compared to physically, because physically I can move around more. I don't feel like I'm stuck in my chair for hours and hours as I was as an employee, where, you have to be at your desk between 9 and 6. And so as a freelancer, I definitely feel physically healthier, but mentally it can be quite difficult, especially in the beginning when you're thinking, oh my gosh, it's such an effort to try and sell my skills, sell my services. And then when you're so close to like getting a contract, and then it might be just one email that you send that like ruins it, or one email that you send that like wins it. And, you've kind of got that win-loss mentality. And I would say that being a freelancer is definitely tough. But if you want the benefits, so you want the time flexibility, you want the holiday flexibility, then it is worth it compared to being an employee. And also, you can always go in and out of being an employee. And if you're a freelancer, you can also go in and out of doing that as well. So sometimes you can take a break from being a freelancer and be like, okay, I just want to earn X amount of money to rebuild my savings, and I'll go back to freelancing. So I'm going to pop in to be an employee for 1 or 2 years. And sometimes that can be one of the ways that you handle it. So I'm a freelancer at the moment. I'm enjoying it. I feel much more relaxed. I think it also depends on your values as well. So are you doing what you want to do? And are you achieving the goals that you kind of have in mind? And so I would say freelancing is, the benefits are definitely outweighing the benefits of being an employee, at least for me for now. So one of the things that you'll have to do as a freelance medical writer that might be mentally stressful is you do need to negotiate every single contract that you work on with a particular client. So sometimes the project can change. Sometimes there can be something called scope creep, which is when the client asks you to do extra things that were not in the original contract. And then you might need to renegotiate the whole contract. And sometimes a client can also just cut the contract short or cut it early. And so that can be devastating, especially if you are depending on that money. And I've definitely experienced that before. And as an employee, usually you do not need to worry about the contract because you negotiated it before you start the job, and then you're in the job and you just continue working for as long as you're happy to be an employee at that company. And you might want to be able to renegotiate once a year. Maybe you ask for promotion, or you ask for your actual employee title to be changed. So maybe you want to go from medical writer to senior medical writer and that kind of thing. Whereas as a freelance medical writer, you define yourself, who you are. So are you a senior medical writer? Are you someone who is a consultant? Are you just a medical writer or a medical copywriter? What's your expertise? And then also another thing that can be stressful sometimes is that when you send an invoice, you need to check that it has been paid. So sometimes you might need to chase your client to actually get paid for the work that you've done, and you will usually get paid after you've done the work. However, you can negotiate in your contract that you get paid a certain amount before you start the work, or maybe you get paid in milestones. So this is when, for example, you will decide that once you complete a third of the project, you get paid a third of the amount, and then you get the final part at the end when you complete the project. Whereas as an employee, you know exactly how much you're going to get paid every month at the end of each month. And unless you get a promotion, that amount won't change. But you can also decide as an employee if you want to go from working full time to working part time. So that's another thing that you might be able to negotiate. But in some cases, some jobs just don't allow someone to be part time, because then they'd have to spread the work across other people who are part time. And then you've got too many bits and bobs everywhere. And so some companies just want one person who's responsible for certain things rather than having two people. And even though that could be better in some cases, because if one person decides to go on holiday, at least you've got another person to cover them and they know exactly what's going on. So as a freelancer, yes, you need to chase contracts, you need to probably chase invoices to get paid, and then you need to be looking for work. Whereas as an employee, you'll be stuck with that contract unless you decide to negotiate it at some point. And I have negotiated my contract a few times as an employee, but sometimes I'll be doing extra work or a different job and get no extra money or recognition for it. And so sometimes that can be mentally frustrating. And so, yeah, just make sure that if you are working as an employee or if you're working as a freelance medical writer, then you do get some kind of testimonial or feedback on your work, because this proves that you actually do the work that you say you do and that they're happy with the work that you do as well. And this can help you get more work in future. And so the main difference between freelancing and being an employee when it comes to holidays, as a freelance medical writer, you're probably going to have more holidays because you can. And you might have longer holidays. So for the first time this year, I had 1 month off completely from everything. Yes, I answered like 2 emails in that 1 month, but I would say it was really, really nice to just have that period of time where I didn't have to think about work. And as an employee, you might be limited in how often you take holiday or even how long your holidays are. So I would usually get about 4 weeks across the year. So I could only take a maximum of 2 weeks at a time. And so maybe I could have a 1 week holiday around Christmas or 1 week holiday around spring, maybe 1 or 2 weeks in summer, and then basically that would be it. All my holidays gone. So and the other thing I find that is when I'm an employee, if I ever took time off, when I came back, all of that work would just be sitting there waiting for me. And so I would hate taking time off as an employee, and I would avoid doing it for as long as possible because the work is like constantly coming in. And so that wasn't healthy, of course. And so as a freelancer, I definitely appreciate the kind of being able to have more boundaries about holidays, and also being able to tell people, yeah, how long is the project? This is how long it's going to take. And then, letting them know, oh, well, I have this holiday booked for, 1 month in June or something. And they will have to be okay with that. So the work cannot pile up as a freelancer, but as an employee, it can. And also as an employee, if you're working with a team and people leave, then you might end up getting their work. So you're less likely to have your holidays approved. And also some people will want specific holidays and you cannot take holidays at the same time as them. So it was really difficult for me to get Christmas holidays. So over the past, oh my gosh, more than 10 years, whether that was being an employee as a pharmacist or being an employee as a medical writer. And so that was a little bit frustrating because they have more control over your time and saying yes or no. And some people do take the holiday anyway, but I do not advise doing that because that is not a good kind of reputation to have. And so as a freelance medical writer, I definitely prefer the holiday situation. And as an employee medical writer, I did not enjoy that. So when it comes to in-person contact as a freelance medical writer, yes, there is a lot less. And I think sometimes that can be a good thing, especially if, like me, you're very prone to getting ill all the time. So I really try to avoid in-person contact, especially around the winter months, And I would say as an employee, I definitely got ill more often. So whether that was from travel or in-person work. And so, yeah, more in-person contact can be good for relationship building, but not great if you're prone to getting ill. And then also, I quite like doing work on my own, and I'm really happy to collaborate. But I find that sometimes if you collaborate in person, it can feel like, you don't see other often. So you want to make the most of the situation. Then you end up having conversations which are not productive. But that's all relationship and character and personality building. So you can't be 100% work mode all the time. It's not what we do as humans. So the other thing about freelance medical writing compared to being an employee medical writer is last minute changes. So I definitely experienced this a lot as an employee medical writer, where there'd be last minute changes to things that I thought, were wrapped up and done. But as a freelancer, I think this is happened to be a lot less, maybe never. So I would say that it's probably easier to accommodate as a freelancer compared to being an employee, because as an employee, you've got a lot of pressure with a lot of projects that you've got going on all at the same time. Whereas as a freelancer, you can kind of accommodate a bit more capacity, I think. And so, yeah, last minute changes are less likely as a freelance medical writer. So the next point I want to talk about is competition versus community. So as an employee, it can feel like you're in a bit of a competitive environment, especially because of hierarchy, and you have lots of managers and fellow employees, and there's a lot of kind of pressure to perform to keep your job. And I don't feel that pressure as a freelance medical writer. And I would say that actually I tend to think of competition a lot less as a freelancer, and I tend to think of community a lot more, because it's much nicer to work with other freelancers who are also motivated and they recognize the benefits of being a freelancer. So the time flexibility, the holidays, maybe the taxes, or maybe the money that they earn. And so I think freelancers have similar mindsets, and they're less likely to be competitors to each other and more likely to be collaborators. Whereas as an employee, you are often maybe trying to even get a promotion, or maybe you're looking to work somewhere else, and then you're always kind of competing against other people who want that job. And I feel like that mindset can be really difficult to have. And I definitely had the mindset, especially after being made redundant, where I felt like I was constantly having to prove myself as an employee to keep my job and keep the benefit of having, a regular income and all of the other benefits and stuff. But I feel like I don't have to prove myself as much as a freelancer, because I have my portfolio. If you want to work with me, I need a proper brief and that kind of thing. And so I would say as a freelancer, it's probably nicer, and it's more, there's a nicer community as well. Whereas as an employee, it can be more difficult, especially when it comes to like confidential things. So you can't really discuss stuff as an employee, whereas a freelancer, maybe you can. So let's leave that at that. So when you are a freelancer, you're going to be more responsible for your equipment. So you might want to have insurance on your phone or your laptop or your software and things like that. Whereas as an employee, you're going to be given usually a laptop or a desk, or, even a chair, and maybe even a work phone. You might also get given like a company car as well. So you would probably have to factor all of those costs into being a freelancer as well. So I was using a company laptop when I was working at the medical communications agency, and also when I was working as an in-house medical copywriter. And it's usually because they want all of the documents and everything to be in one place, and they want to have control over it. And that's fair enough. Whereas when you're a freelancer, you have all of your clients, all of your documents, all on the same thing, and it's your personal equipment. So you need to look after it. Whereas if something happens to your equipment as an employee medical writer, then it's likely that it's insured and you can get it replaced. You can also do the same thing as a freelancer, but it just means that you're paying for it. So when you're a freelance medical writer, you are more likely to be able to build a portfolio that is something you can show to all of your future potential clients to get you more work. Whereas as an employee, you're probably less likely to be able to share things in a portfolio to get you more work. You'll probably move from job to job as an employee, and you might have signed some paperwork where you have confidential information or non-disclosure agreements, which are NDAs. And I've had to do that as an employee. And I think it's quite frustrating when you do a lot of work and you've done a lot of research and you're really, really proud of your work, but you can't actually show it to anyone. And obviously your work becomes a business asset for your employer. And so as a freelancer, this can happen as well, but you've probably got a bit more uh, kind of, you've got a bit more of a way to persuade your client to actually let you to share the work. And when I was in a medical communications agency as an employee, I did ask my employer if I could share some of the work. And they said, well, you'll have to ask the client directly because we had multiple client projects. And so when I asked the client, they actually said yes. And so I was able to share some of the work that I was doing with them because I had worked on hundreds of pages of work. And you do a lot of writing as a medical writer, especially as an employee when you're working in an agency or in-house. And I would say that it's really important to negotiate being able to share some of your work because this is proof that you are able to follow a brief and meet deadlines and produce good work that actually performs well as well. So maybe you can measure performance of your work. So did you, for example, grow the social media channel with the posts? Did you get more email signups with the blogs that you wrote and that kind of thing? So the next thing I want to talk about is personal branding. So as a freelancer, you can personal brand as much as you like. So you are essentially always selling yourself, selling your skills, showing off the great work that you do, showing off things that you've learned. And you can do that all freely. And obviously the limitation is getting permission from your clients if you want to share their work. But as an employee, your personal brand is probably going to be used to promote the company that you work at. So I would say that if you are working at an agency or a pharmaceutical company or in-house at a startup or health tech company, then your personal brand will become the company brand. So just be aware that that is a possibility and definitely feel like you've got less freedom to say what you're thinking or share what you're doing. But, it depends on the policy of the place that you work. So sometimes they'll be like, yeah, you can use your LinkedIn for whatever you want, or we want you to actually post on your LinkedIn about the company or something like that. And so I would say that's probably a question you want to ask when you are in the interview stage of the job. So make sure that you ask, is there an obligation or is there an expectation that they want you to promote them on your personal pages? So I would say just look out for that. Whereas as a freelancer, I've definitely found a lot more freedom of doing what I want and doing a mixture of things. And so, yeah, make sure that whatever you post about is representative of you and what you're happy about posting and being out there on the internet as well. So the other thing as a freelance medical writer is the skills that you learn. So when I talk about skills, I am talking about using certain software or learning certain structures of writing, or maybe learning how to use physical equipment, maybe video equipment, etc. And so I would say as a freelance medical writer, I've definitely learned a lot more. And actually the skills I learned as a freelance medical writer are what helped me get my first full-time employee job at the medical communications agency. So I would say that if you are looking to learn skills and there are particular skills that you want to learn, so maybe you want to learn how to write a social media post or white paper or Congress report or news report or something like that, you can go out and learn as much as you like. You just need to land the right client or maybe take a few courses and then actually learn those skills and then perform those skills as part of a job and get paid. So as an employee, sometimes you will get paid training, but sometimes you won't. And so I didn't really get much training as an employee. There were like 2 or 3 times per year where they would hire someone to come in and teach us some stuff. But if you compare that to the constant learning that I have to do as a freelance medical writer, then it doesn't compare. So you learn a lot more as a freelancer, but as an employee, it can set a good foundation for you. So if there's something that you are very interested in as an employee, then maybe you could ask your employer if there is training budget for that. And so even, for example, I had someone who was made redundant from their job, and they actually paid for a course for that person so that they could actually learn medical writing as their next career. And so they paid for the fundamentals of medical writing course that I created. And so now they've got a job as a medical writer, which is amazing. So you can learn whatever you want as a freelancer. And then also as an employee, you will have your contracted work hours, but that doesn't stop you from learning outside of those work hours. So you can still learn things, but as a freelancer, you've just got more time to do that. And so as an employee, I would say that, your kind of skill development is definitely based on what you do at work and then what you do outside of work. Whereas as a freelancer, you could be working and learning skills at the same time, but also you could have a bigger budget to invest in learning new things if you feel like those skills are going to help you get other work. So for example, for me, that was video creation. And that was definitely a very difficult skill to learn. And it's a multiple skill set type of thing. And yeah, it has been worth it though. So I would also say that the skills you learn as an employee might also be involved with group work more likely. So, for example, how to take notes during a meeting and that kind of thing. Whereas as a freelancer, you're probably less likely to use kind of group work skills because you're usually working on your own unless you are a business and you're learning other skills such as how to manage people because you have hired fellow medical writers or designers to work with you. And so you need to learn things like maybe contracts or how to pay people and that kind of thing, or maybe even how to interview them to check that they're the right person you want to work with. And so as a freelancer, you've probably got more of a business mindset compared to an employee where you just want to be able to do your job and get paid. So as a freelance medical writer, you're probably going to be able to connect with a lot more people. But as an employee, you probably have the opportunity to connect with people that you couldn't as a freelancer. And so this is more likely to be like people in higher places. And so, for example, like the CEO of a company, especially if you're invited to conferences where you're meeting leaders from other companies. And so, as a strategy, you could, as an employee, try and get all of those contact details. And then if you do decide to become a freelancer, you've still got those contact details and you can use that to help you with your freelance business. As a freelancer, if you do go to conferences, you can still make those connections. And I would say that usually if you are an employee and you've got a kind of big brand behind you, then that can get people more interested in you. So I've definitely known people who have worked at big pharmaceutical companies. They're more likely to be able to work at other big pharmaceutical companies, whereas if you're a freelancer and you've never worked at or with a big pharmaceutical company, that can be quite difficult to get into. So as I said, as a freelancer, you're more likely to be part of a community that wants to connect with you and work with you and collaborate and so on. Whereas as an employee, you might be a little bit more restricted or limited. And that will also reflect on maybe the type of people that you meet or the type of skills that you learn as well, just to bring it back to that point. Because if they want you to know how to write specific documents in a specific way, then you will kind of pick up the habits of doing that. Whereas as a freelancer, you're more likely to be able to adapt your writing in different ways because you're practicing how to do that for different clients. And even though you can still do that as an employee if you have multiple clients, if you're working in an agency, but less likely if you're in a pharmaceutical company or in-house. So in terms of sustainability or longevity of your career, as a freelance medical writer, it's probably less sustainable if you cannot get into it and really just ride out the difficult first couple of years, I would say. Whereas as an employee, it's probably more sustainable. It might be easier for you to find other work if you've got a really good track record as an employee in your previous company. But I would say that there's always the fear of being made redundant, for me personally anyway. So I would say that being an employee can be sustainable. But again, once you've kind of lived the freelance medical writer life, being an employee medical writer is much more difficult to go into. So I cannot imagine my life as an employee medical writer working from 9 to 6, Monday to Friday, and only having 4 weeks holiday per year. So I would say that freelance medical writing is more sustainable if you can figure it out and make it work for you. Whereas as an employee medical writer, it's probably going to be easy, especially to start off with, but there's still the fear of being made redundant. And also you have to pass your probation period. So your probation period could be anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And during that time, they could give you maybe 1 month notice. So that's another thing to check on your contract. So make sure that you're actually negotiating those kinds of things. So if you do have a probation period of 3 months, then how much notice do you need to give them if you want to leave? And how much notice do they need to give you if they want you to leave? So make sure that you have a look at that. And some people couldn't make it as little as 1 week or 2 weeks, which is not great, especially if you have bills to pay. So, and you have a family to support as well. And so really think about that as well. So sustainability probably winning on the freelance medical writing side, but only if you can figure it out, make it work for you. Probably less likely to be an issue with being an employee medical writer, as long as you pass the probation period and you're doing a good job. So finally, let's talk about family-friendly situations. So as a freelance medical writer, you've got that time flexibility. You've also got that holiday flexibility. So it's much more family friendly to be a freelance medical writer. And I have had a lot of people approach me who say, I want to be a freelance medical writer or a part-time medical writer because I have a young family and I want to raise them. I want to have more kids. Or maybe you're a full-time carer for a member of your family, maybe your parents. Or maybe you have pets and you need to give them more attention as well because that's what you love in life. Or maybe you have certain hobbies and maybe you love to travel. So being family friendly is definitely on the winning side of freelance medical writing. Whereas as an employee, I have had some people who say, it's really difficult for me to reject meetings which happen at 3 p.m., which is when my child is going to be finishing school and I need to go and pick them up. And I always have to excuse myself. And I feel like my employer is not very considerate of me having to do that. And so, maybe they hold it against them a little bit as an employee, which is not a great feeling. And then also if their child is ill, they might need to take extra time off because maybe they get ill as a parent. So it's definitely something that you want to consider as an employee medical writer. So do you really want to do full-time Monday to Friday, or can you maybe negotiate doing part-time, or maybe having a more flexible working hours, so working hours of the day? So maybe you start at 9 and you finish at 2, and then you've got some time to go and pick up your kids. And then maybe you can start again at 5 p.m. until 7 p.m. to make up any extra hours. So I would say think about what you can negotiate again as an employee. Now, when it comes to legal support as a freelance medical writer, this is something that you have to pay for as a business expense. And you can get insurance to cover that legal support as well. But as an employee medical writer, you're less likely to ever have to think about that. So I'd say it's less risky as an employee medical writer. And there's probably a lot of stuff about this in your contract as well. So what are you responsible for? What is the company responsible for? And who will pay for legal damages if something goes wrong? So usually it should be the company. Now, as a freelance medical writer, you might see this in your contract as an indemnity. And so you want your client to have indemnity insurance, and they should indemnify you, and you should not be the one indemnifying the client. But generally, I would say that most medical writers have not had any kind of problems with insurance or legal support or things going wrong or being sued or things like that. So touch wood. Hopefully it never happens. So the type of work and the type of client that you get as a freelancer is essentially up to you. So you can decide what you want to work on and also the type of client that you're happy to work with as well. So sometimes freelancers will get a lot of startups approach them because startup companies or new companies have a very small budget, or they've just got a whole bunch of investment money and they want to start hiring people to get the company going. And so they might approach freelancers because they think they're cheaper than employees, but actually being an employee means you are more affordable for startups and things like that. So as an employee, if you go to a startup, you're probably going to have an expert set of skills that they actually need. And I would say that you can choose to work for a pharmaceutical company or an agency or in-house. Same as a freelancer, you can work for all of those different people, but probably it's very different compared to a full-time capacity. So pick the type of work that you want based on the skills that you want to learn and also how much you're going to enjoy the work as well. So think about those things. So as a freelance medical writer, you can start from zero. And as an employee medical writer, you can start from zero as well. But there are two big differences. So as a freelancer, you are probably going to be starting with either a healthcare professional background or a science background, or maybe you've got a degree in English or something like that. And you're going to need to find your first ever clients to get your first pieces into your portfolio. So my first pieces of writing, I barely got paid. And some of them I did for free. And so I would say that if you're in that situation, you should get out of it as soon as possible. I have created a free course, which is Medical Writing Skills for Beginners, that you can check out. And hopefully that will give you more confidence when you are starting as a medical writer. I'll leave a link to that below. And then as an employee medical writer, I would say that when you're starting from zero, you have to be one of the lucky ones that get into an entry-level medical writing job. And then you're likely to get training on the job, especially if it's entry-level, or if you're an associate medical writer, then I would say get as much training as you can. And then you can be an employee for 1 to 2 years. And then you can decide to be a freelancer if you want, or if you just really like being an employee, then absolutely stay that way for as many more years as you like. So again, you can always switch from being an employee medical writer to being a freelance medical writer, back and forth. So if you're a freelance medical writer, you need to build your experience the hard way through finding clients and getting those medical writing pieces for your portfolio. Whereas as an employee medical writer, you're going to get the training and skills, but you are probably going to have to negotiate being able to show those pieces of writing in a potential portfolio if your plan is to freelance later. So now I want to know, do you want to be a freelance medical writer? And in a future video, I will talk about how to become a freelance medical writer. And I have spoken about my journey before, so there are existing videos if you want to learn about how I became a medical writer. And I would say that if you do want to freelance, it's a choice and not everyone makes it, but it's definitely worth considering depending on the benefits and lifestyle that you want to live. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.